Welcome to Queers and Quills, the official podcast. I'm audiobook narrator Kirt Graves. Every episode, I invite an attending author or narrator to join me for a one-on-one conversation about their lives and their art, so attendees and readers from across the world can get to know them not only as professionals, but as people. Joining me today is Emery Lee. Emery Lee is the award-winning author of Meet Cute Diary and Café con Leche. He's the founder of #TransBooks365, a community hashtag made to celebrate books by and about trans people. Coming from a university background of creative writing, he's gone on to write entertainment news, edit literary magazines, and work as a trade book reviewer. Outside of novels, he's written interactive fiction, short stories, and webcomics. Their books have received starred reviews, been featured in ALA's Rainbow Book List, and been translated into multiple languages. Drawing inspiration from anime, pop-punk music, and their own culture and identities, he seeks to tell multi-layered stories about complex characters that challenge conventional power structures and make room for marginalized readers across fandom spaces. Welcome to the podcast, Emery Lee.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me. So, the first question for everybody on this podcast and almost every other podcast I do is, tell me your author origin story.
Yeah, of course. So, I have been writing probably like my entire life. I started when I was maybe like 7 or 8 years old. And it was just kind of a hobby, like kind of my like escapist, adventure into like whatever story would come to mind. But I had a lot of teachers and like people around me who would be like, oh, you should turn that into a career. And like as an adult, I can look at that and think they were probably just trying to be nice. But like as a kid, I took it very seriously. So like as I went into like middle school and high school, I was very like, I'm going to become a published author. Like that's my dream. That's my goal. And so going into college, I started self-publishing books. But I was very like new to the whole like idea of just like a publishing career. Like, what does this look like? What kind of stuff would I even want to put out long term? So after a while, I abandoned that whole brand, I guess, and I decided to query, get an agent, and I pivoted into rom-coms, whereas I used to write fantasy. So it was my kind of like break into like the space, like this like young adult rom-coms thing, and then I did that for a little while, and then eventually I was like, I feel like I'm kind of over writing for teenagers. Not that I don't love teens. Like I love teens. I love the way they read books. Like they're amazing. But it's like I feel like I stopped connecting with my fiction the way that I used to, and that made me realize that I really wanted to write more for adults. So I decided I was gonna start working on some more like mature, like aligned projects. I put that out to my readers. They were so excited about it, and so they helped me crowdfund a new book. So now I'm working into the adult publishing space, but like where I'm doing it on my own again, like self-publishing, so that I can take more control over my own direction and everything.
I love that. First of all, kudos to those adults in your life who told you, yes, you can.
Yeah.
Because like I feel that's the opposite of the story I hear most of the time, which is like people having to fight through a bunch of adults saying like, well, it's one thing to dream about that, but make sure you have a fallback plan. Yeah,
I think it was interesting for me too, because it was like my like teachers, my mentors were very like, go for it, you have to. And then like, my conservative Asian mother was like, you need to like go into the sciences, do something that's going to make you money. Like, I was okay. So I think like
so you had a healthy balance.
I think it helped a lot too, because it did mean that not only was I encouraged on like the one hand to like really go into it, but I also had that like dose of reality where I was looking at it as a business and not just as an art form.
Yeah. In your early like fantasy indie pub days, were you also writing queer characters, or is that something that became important to you later on?
So the first book I put out originally had a straight, like an allocis het main character. And I worked on that book for about maybe like 5 years until just before publication, I like rewrote it to make her asexual.
Okay.
And so I did, so it released with a queer character, but it was not going to be that way for most of its like production cycle. And then after that, I kind of like, I feel like once I realized what I could do, it kind of like I've never written another straight like main characters.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a safe place to say that that's okay. There's plenty of those stories out there. I love that. I love that. What is it about writing queer characters that appeals to you now? Why is that important for you?
Yeah, I think it's like funny because people always be like, it's so important to tell queer stories. Like queer stories are so important. And like they are. Like we can look at like censorship efforts, across the country. We can look at like, how egregious like transphobia especially has become in the past like few years. But like for me, I never wrote queerness into books because I felt like it was like important because I felt like I was doing anything. Like it was just because I learned I could write queer characters and I realized it was less boring than writing straight people.
Very that.
I feel like once you realize how broad things can be, like you realize like you can write like experiences that reflect like my own like diverse friend groups and like my diverse experiences. I don't want to go back. Like I have no desire whatsoever to write straight people. I've actually tried because I've been told like from like agents, editors, all this type of stuff where they're like, oh, well, this book would sell a lot better if the characters were straight or if they were cis or like all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll try. And then I'll write like, 1,000 words or so. And I'm like, I can't do it. I can't. It's just so boring. I just do not feel inspired by that.
Yeah, there's the transition from like capital I important, which we all know that it is, versus like lower I important, where it's just kind of like important to us to tell the stories,
Yeah.
And then there's capital I interesting. Like it's just more interesting because once you have that taste of like what it is to read or see in media somebody who reflects your own experience, it's just like, oh, well, why would I ever watch or read that other thing when I have this?
It's like sometimes I ask myself like, I'm like, why do straight people write like straight books? I'm like, oh right, because they're straight, so that like makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But like for me, it's just very like it just feels so limiting to be like, I'm gonna try to write this story, or not even but like in this style that's been done countless times over the past like several decades, right? Like I feel like what like he meets her, he falls first, like variety has not been done before. And I feel like there reaches a point where I just feel like less like I'm a discovery writer. So when I write, I'm writing to like figure out what like the story can tell. And I feel like there's so little to discover when every version of the cishet story has been told so many times. Yeah. Whereas like to actually get to explore queer experiences like often that haven't been explored on page before is like it's a very like fulfilling like venture.
And it opens the world to new mediums because like this is going to shock you because I'm like a white guy from the Midwest, but I've never really been into like rap or hip hop. And then Lil Nas X hit the scene and I was like, suddenly I care because he's rapping about boys. I was like, oh, this is fun. I like this. Whereas like, I never saw myself in that world and therefore never found it interesting. And then as soon as they were telling a story that I could relate to, I was like, this is great. I really enjoy this, So.
Like it's interesting too, but like in reverse is I used to listen to country music, but like my best friend hates country music, like hates it. But in the last few months, I've been like, okay, but listen to this queer artist, listen to this queer artist, and now they're like, okay, fine, maybe I like some of it. I don't know. I'm like,
right,
right.
Exactly. What are some of the stories that influenced you as you were growing up that you think might inform your work now?
So like it's interesting because I feel like every like 3 to 5 years I almost like reinvent what I'm looking for in fiction, like both what I like and like also what I'm like trying to write. So like when I was young, like my first major influence was Charmed, and I used to like that was like where I got my first like every book idea was like steeped so heavily in that. And then as I got a little bit older, like I shifted from like originally when I first started writing, I actually didn't read much. I only read like comics, and then it was comics, and then other than that it was TV that inspired all of my writing. And then as I shifted into actually reading more, I was like on that early YA wave of like all the really trashy paranormal romance, like Twilight, Vampire Academy, like The Mortal Instruments, like that was like my thing. And so that was kind of what inspired my like first wave of writing, like my first fantasy like indie pub like section. And then after that, when I was like, okay, well, I kind of like the idea of writing romance, then I started, reading a lot more rom-coms and that kind of thing. And that's when I got really inspired by like Becky Albertalli, Christina Forrest, like people like that writing in like the YA romance space. And then I feel like now I've almost shifted back to my roots where I'm reading way more like web comics, manga, and like watching like anime and like C-dramas and that kind of stuff. And I feel like that is actually probably the biggest influence on my writing now. So it's a very like dramatic shift, I think, from like this like YA contemporary section to like now I'm looking at a lot of like really dark fantasy romance in like
well, maybe
Chinese and Japanese.
Maybe the times are a call-in for some dark fantasy romance. You know,
I think a lot of people say like, oh, like, you know, times are rough, so like I need like escapist fiction that's super happy. And I think I'm the opposite. I'm like, escapist fiction that's bloody is what I need, right?
Mm-hmm. It depends on the day for me, right? Like, it can go either way. Sometimes I need comfort, sometimes I need rage. And art is there for me both times.
I know, it's
so
perfect.
I don't actually go out in the world and hurt someone else. Right? That's what one of the functions that art serves.
Yeah, just to work through so much. I feel like with my first book, which I think is funny, is that it's a rom-com, but like I worked through so much pent-up rage in that like very happy, funny story. And it's just like, I feel like it was very much like I refuse to give in to like everyone's hatred. Like, this kid is going to be happy out of like defiance. But like, yeah, I think like just having that like ability to like really throw any like overwhelming emotions into fiction or like escape into fiction to get away from like whatever is like, you know, weighing on you is just, it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. When you were writing comics, as somebody who has never done such a thing, how do you write a comic?
Well, so I do the writing and the illustrating. So yes. So it's so I read the comic, I do the whole thing.
Okay,
but like,
because you're doing it all. You're just doing the whole thing.
But like I've also written, like I did work on a comic. We didn't go anywhere, but I was working on a comic with a friend once where she was doing the illustrating and I was just doing the script. So I would just write it out like as a comic script, and like a generic format, but it was just basically like, you know, you label like what page it's going to be, how the panel layout will be, and then like this like the details of what happens, and then like a separate section for the dialogue.
Very cool. Love that. What's a webcomic that we should be paying attention to right now that you're loving? Oh
my god, there's so many. That's such a hard. But one I've been reading a lot is Be My Villain on Webtoons. It's a romance, and it's about this guy who's like, his gay dads are like superheroes, and their like biggest villain is like this like random guy who's like just like this like super dark shadowy villain who does all these horrible things. And then one day that shadowy villain saves his life and then asks him on a date, and he's like okay, and it just spirals from there. The story is like really good. Like, it's one of those stories that I love because it feels kind of silly and surface at first, and then like the further you get into it, there's so much plot, so much like lore, like the characters are all really deep. It's like, it gets really good.
Say less. I'm sold. It's like the ambiguously gay duo had a kid, and here's what happens. I think SNL's just on my mind because they had the 50th anniversary. That's where my brain went. So if somebody is coming to your work for the very first time, what would you point them to as like the Emery Lee special, at least right now, to get familiar with your work?
So like for me, I feel like I'm very much of the belief that like whatever's my most recent project is probably what I would want you to read, just because I feel like so it's been a few years since my last book released. I have my next book is called Forget Me Not. It releases in a couple weeks. But like the last two, it's been several years since I released them. And like what I was explaining to someone the other day is like, you know, Capricorn Lychee released in 2022, but I drafted it in 2019. So like,
wow, I'm
an entirely different person than who I was when I wrote that book. Like, that was pre-pandemic. Like I cannot even like remember who that person was. So I guess my recommendation would be Forget Me Not, which releases on March 11th. And then I have my next book, Don't Drag This Out, comes out in June. So that would be like, if you stumble into this podcast late, check that one. But I am very But like a very like, catch me at my most recent. It's the only thing I feel like I can promise I still stand by.
I love that. And I think that's important too, to always be evolving. Like, because the alternative is like wishing you were as good as you used to be.
Right. And my thing is, I'm like, I don't ever want to be the type of author who feels like I'm regressing.
Yeah.
Regardless of in what way I feel like I'm growing, I always want to feel like I am growing and changing and becoming something new. And I want my work to reflect that. So I feel like if I'm putting out the same book every time, or if I feel like my last book was my best book, I know, like, I can't live that way.
Yeah. Yeah. So, solid advice. Look for the most recent one. So, well, now that we've had the chance to get to know you a little bit better, are you willing to play a little game with me?
Yes, let's go.
Okay, it'd be super awkward at this point if you were like, no, thank you.
Yeah, I don't do games. That's just...
All right, so the rules of our game are simple. I have a deck of cards, and on each card is a question. So these questions aim to learn more about you. Some are biographical, some are hypothetical, and some are just silly. But I'm not picking which questions you will answer. Fate is. I will deal 3 cards every round, and you choose one. Whatever card you pick, you agree to answer. But you do have a couple of outs. So if a question comes along that you don't want to answer, you have 2 opportunities to switch things up. So you can either turn the tables on me one time, forcing me to answer the question, or you can also discard a personal question in favor of answering a bookish question from my white deck of cards. So you can be saved by the white deck, but you must answer whatever question gets dealt. In that case, there's only one coming out, and you have to answer it. And you know how some people feel about those bookish opinions. So
yeah, that's true. That is true. Okay, let's do it.
Are you ready? Are you ready to play?
I'm ready. Let's go.
All right. The deck is here. I'm shuffling. Card 1, card 2, and card 3. Which one do we pick?
Let's go with 2.
Card 2. What would be the worst ingredients to fill a burrito with?
Like, I'm like listing like a single ingredient, like all of the ingredients that together would make the worst burrito.
What would make the worst burrito?
Okay, I'm thinking...
For you personally.
Pineapple, mayonnaise, something like sour gummy worms, throw in like, throw in maybe like something like, I don't know, like ice cream, like mint chocolate chip ice cream, something like that would also make it soggy and gross. And then like, what is something that's like crunchy, but like also like with Pocky sticks, the strawberry one specifically.
Okay. So, granted, together, some like the mayonnaise really throws it for a loop.
Yeah.
You named a lot of delicious things. Do you dislike all those things?
Hate all of those things individually. Okay, I hate all of them, the thought of all of them together. I mean, I don't like pineapple. Everything else I'll eat. I'm like, but the thought of, I was trying to like balance, like the worst balance possible. So that those are that way.
Yeah, you don't like sour. Like if you don't like pineapple and sour worms are like. Ugh.
No, I like sour. I love sour. I actually love sour gummy worms. They're actually one of my favorite candies. I just, yeah, I know. It's pineapple. Pineapple is just, I don't like how it just like burns my tongue.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's all that is. But like, yeah, with the other stuff, it's all stuff that I eat. Like I eat that stuff, but I just felt like if you put that together, objectively, it would ruin everything. Like
Plus, it's all in a tortilla.
Right. And it just brings out the worst parts of each item.
No. Yeah. All right. Fair enough. All right. Round 2. Here we go. Card 1, card 2, and card 3. Which do you choose?
Is it weird if I just keep picking 2 because it's the most balanced number?
No, they're different every time.
Okay, let's go with 2 again.
You can do whatever you want. What makes you feel old?
Nothing. Oh, that's nothing. Nothing makes me feel old. I don't feel old. No. I mean, so number 1, I'm in my 20s, so I think that objectively is young.
Right.
But like also, I don't believe in like that like that kind of like that mentality of like, oh man, I'm getting old. Like I'm just like, no, I'm not. Like old is like not really a thing. Like, we're always reinventing ourselves. We're always having like, we always have like future in front of us. And like, I could die tomorrow. Like, you know, like, I mean, like anyone, like, I think about like my mom is in her 60s and she was like, you know, stressing about how like, you know, she's so old, all this kind of stuff. I was like, I could die before her. I make bad life choices. I could be dead long before her. So I don't know. I don't feel old. I just always feel young. It's weird as that is.
What a morbidly optimistic way to move through life. You know? Like, I could be as old as I'm ever going to get right now.
It's just one of those things that for me, I feel like it feels kind of like irrelevant. Like, I just feel like I don't need to dwell on it. Like, I don't really care how old I mean, I care how old I am, like, for like legal purposes and stuff, but I just don't care how, like, I don't feel like culturally I feel old or young or like anything. I just feel like person.
I did wonder earlier when you were talking about kind of moving away from writing YA work, if maybe part of that was an aging thing.
Yeah. I think I noticed as I hit my mid-20s that I was like, I think when I was in my early 20s, like fresh out of college, I wrote YA because it kind of, even though I wasn't living it, it felt like I still had so much to say about what it means to be that age because I hadn't had the chance to talk about it as much. And then I feel like
just enough perspective. Right,
exactly. With just enough perspective. It still felt relevant, but I was also still giving like advice as opposed to being like, this is like my current everyday. And I feel like I passed like 25 and now I'm like, the advice I want to give you is on like how to remember to pay your taxes, not like on how to like ask somebody out in high school. Like, it's just, I feel like my perspective has just changed enough that I feel like the best I can talk about is not what happens when you're 15. It's what happens when you're like 25. Like,
yeah. Fair. Good. What makes me feel old? Talking to people who describe their ages in their 20s. Let's go again. Shuffle, shuffle, shuffle. That's a freebie. I gave you my answer without even making you choose it. Card 1, card 2, and card 3. I think I know which one you're going to choose.
Just to spice it up, I'm going to say 1.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Here we go. Okay. What things do you do every day that you wish could be automated?
Waking up and getting out of bed.
Like the full Jetsons?
Like, I'm just physically the whole, like,
Do you know what the Jetsons are?
Yeah, I do, actually.
Okay. All right. Well, you know what? You're young. You don't feel old, so I had to check.
And so, you know, I don't eat, I didn't watch it like any sort of regularity, but I have seen it.
Okay.
But yeah, no, I feel like that, like any sort of like getting up process, I don't like the act of physically getting up. Also things like brushing my teeth, that's annoying. Picking what I'm gonna eat for dinner. Like, I don't like the choice. You know what I mean? Like, I want it to be something good, but like, I don't know what that is. Somebody else give me something good. Just serve it up to me. Like, that would be great.
Plus, what counts as good is really so subjective and is totally based. I have this conversation with my husband all the time. If you ask me what I want, I'll be picky. If you put prepared food in front of me, I'll eat it and think it's delicious.
You know, that's the thing, too. I'm like,
don't give me a choice. Just make the food and I'll eat it.
I'll spend like 2 hours trying to decide what to eat. And then at the end of the day, I'm going to pick like something generic and basic that's going to taste fine. Like,
yeah.
It's not worth it. It's not worth the energy that drains from my life to have to do that every day.
Right. Yeah. The decision process is tiring. Just give me food. Just give me food. Sometimes I'm like, just give me the paste in a tube and I'll eat it and we'll be fine.
Yeah, there are days where I wish I was like, I wish we just didn't have to eat. I wish food was not a requirement. Yeah.
Well, Ozempic. When they start putting it in the drinking water. All right. Another round. Card 1, card 2, and card 3. Which do you choose?
Okay, I'm back to 2.
Back to 2. All right, here we go. If you had a personal mascot, what would it be?
Kappa. This thing.
What's a Kappa? Okay.
It's from Japanese mythology.
Okay.
And like they're these creatures that like they look kind of like. Have you seen Avatar: The Last Airbender?
Mm-hmm.
The turtle ducks from that series are like clearly inspired by kappas because that's basically what they look like.
Okay.
But they live like under bridges. And they put their arms up places that they probably should not in people. And they pull out like this like pleasure orb that has it's a whole thing. But they're queer culture. And
Yeah.
like this, it's adorable. I'm here for it. So that's, but that would be my mascot because I just feel like they're representative of like Japanese culture, queer culture. That is where I exist. But also like I just think they're like cute and like weird, and I would never want something generic. So at least this way I feel like a little like more original.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was so scared when you first said that I was like, oh God, it's a young person thing. And here I am just not knowing it.
No,
I'm super thrilled to just be culturally ignorant. I didn't know about that.
Definitely been around for centuries, so you're good.
Just didn't know. Shame on me, but in a way that makes me feel younger. Let's do a couple more rounds. Here we go. Round 1, round 2, and round 1. Card 1, card 2, and card 3.
Okay, let's do 3.
Okay.
Trying to like, shake things up a little bit.
Yeah, you're switching it up. You're making me not know where things are going. Like, what if I wasn't actually even dealing 3 cards? Because I was like,
I gotta keep you on your toes. Make sure you're being honest.
Yeah. All right. What's your worst roommate or house guest story?
Okay, so I like this is funny because I've had so many bad roommates. It was the first year.
I can't choose.
They were all during the first year of college. And then like after that, I moved in with my current roommate. We've lived together for like a decade now.
Wow.
But like the first year was just like the worst. It was, I had this one roommate. She was like my friend. So like I tried to give her a pass for like her bad behaviors, but they were egregious. She was extremely dirty. She would leave her dishes in the sink or on the stove for like a week plus. We had a roach infestation and I was like, what is going on? Like we were all like, there were 4 of us living in that like dorm. And so we were all like trying to figure out like what was going on with the roaches. We were trying to get rid of them. It turns out she had a box of pizza under her bed for over a month.
Oh my God.
Over a month. I know. She always had her boyfriend over and her boyfriend was like this like deadbeat. He like
he would have to be. She's got pizza under her bed.
Okay, well, so he couldn't hold a job. So he was always like needing money. So like he would like rely on her for money. And so she would just be like yelling at him all the time, like how much she couldn't stand his behaviors, all this kind of stuff. And I was like, why are you dating him? All you do is yell at him. Then they would have sex and like they were really loud. And like she had the most like disgusting sound, like it was like horrible. I was like, why do you sound like that? Why do you sound like that? Like I was like, you should not sound like that. The sex was like horrible. You should not sound like that.
Oh my God. Why do you sound like that?
it was like, so concerning. Like I was like, maybe you need to like go to a doctor. I don't know. You should not. That's not what sex is supposed to sound like. That's gross. And like, yeah, she was just like, she was also like really, really like trashy in that like she did not believe in like quality, like products or anything. So like she would like make fun of us if we like had anything that was like not like super cheap and like badly made. And like she would get like very like snotty about like I went like grocery shopping at like a grocery store. Like, whatever the local grocery store was. And she got mad that I didn't go to Walmart. Like, she was like, Walmart's cheaper. Why didn't you go to Walmart? I was like, your money, number 1. But like, number 2, like, because I wanted fresh produce. And like,
yeah,
it was just like so weird. She was so
what a
like,
strange thing to be judgmental about. Who cares?
That, like, she was so dramatic. And like, I'm sure that's why she fought with her boyfriend so much. But it was just, the whole thing was too much. I couldn't.
She sounds like a nightmare. I am glad to have never lived with this person. The sex sounds alone are enough to me.
I was like, I don't know if that's what like made me realize that I could never be straight because I was like, I do not want to have sex the way you have sex. Like that's just horrifying. I don't want to be.
If that's what that is, I want no part of it.
Yeah, nothing to do with that.
I had my first roommate in college, a dorm. Like there were 4 of us sort of like in a suite thing, but like 2 of us shared a bedroom. And so my guy that I actually shared a bedroom with, his name was Alex. Shout out Alex. We were so totally opposite that we both looked at each other on that first day and were like, Let's not even try to be friends.
I love that.
And like it became something that people on campus talked about. Just like what a mismatched odd couple we were. And everybody else on our floor was getting along gangbusters and having so much fun. By the end of the year, he and I were the only people still talking to each other.
Yeah, exactly.
Because we were just like, yeah, we're different people. We're not going to try to change the other person. We're not going to try to hang out outside of this. We live together. He was very laid back and very dirty, but was fine with me cleaning up after him, which was the only way we were going to survive the year. Because I was like, I can't be in a dirty space. So you need to be okay with me touching your stuff because I have to clean it. And he was like, yeah, dude, I don't care. I was like, perfect. I was like, here we are. We're in a happy relationship. So yeah, that rooming with a person you know and like is tough.
It's hard. I guess there's something beautiful about saying like, we're not going to be friends, or like, we're only going to talk like on occasion. Just like having those relationships where you acknowledge that you do not need to be like super intimate people. You can just know each other. And that's okay.
But with enough communication.
Right.
To survive. Because he was bringing girls over and I was like, you got to tell me. I was like, because it happened one time where he tried to do something while I was in the room and I was like, stop, no. I was like, absolutely not. We shan't be doing that. I was like, so even if I'm asleep, you message me, you call my cell, you call the room if you have to wake me up. You know, when phones used to have, so let me explain it. Phones used to have cords that went into the wall, and they would ring out loud. So I was like, you call me.
It didn't even occur to me. You were like, call the room. I was like, oh yeah, you guys had like a shared cell or something. And I was thinking,
no.
It didn't even occur to me. I was right, that makes sense.
This was in a time when we had to talk to each other before we came to decide who was bringing the phone that we would share.
Oh yeah, okay.
All right, last round of cards. Here we go. Card 1, 2, or 3.
Back to 2.
Back to 2. If you were reincarnated as a famous landmark, which would it be?
I'm going to flip that one to you.
That's tough. Because, like, what's the personification of a landmark that matters? I'm going to say Colossus of Rhodes. Because I, too, have an outsized idea of my importance to the world. And I'm pretty sure he like straddled like a waterway and was in his own way a gatekeeper. And I sometimes like to do that.
That's fair.
So I'll say Colossus of Rhodes if I were to be reincarnated as a long destroyed landmark. That's what I would do. So thank you so much for playing the game. Thank you so much for coming and talking about your work and your life. I really appreciate it.
Of course, and it was a great conversation.
Good. I'm glad it wasn't just fun for one of us. That would be would be awkward.
I'm always down to do like nice, fun, silly interviews. In contrast to the like, so what was it like having your book banned type of stuff we have today?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess go listen to some other podcast to find out how Emery feels about that, because we did not get that here. Thank you for joining me for Queers and Quills, the official podcast. If you're already signed up to attend Queers and Quills, make sure to say hello to me and to Emery at the Oregon Convention Center in May. If you're not, follow Queers and Quills on Instagram to follow along with all the fun this year and get updates about ticket availability in the future. Until next time, I'm Kirt Graves, and I hope you're having a very gay day. Queers and Quills, the official podcast, is produced and hosted by Kirt Graves, in coordination with Mahogany Mail and Marley Valentine. All copyrighted material is shared with permission. Music and sound effects are licensed through Storyblocks Audio. All opinions shared are those of the individuals and do not reflect the positions or policies of any company or organization with which they happen to be associated.